There we go. The Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee is now in session. I would ask the clerk to call the roll.
Representative Cochran.
Here.
Darby.
Here.
Halford.
Here.
Holsey.
Here.
Hurt.
Here.
Potts. Reedy.
Here.
Shaw.
Here.
Chairman Todd.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I want to read over a kind of a fact of the day. This is concerning Tennessee's cattle industry. It's an important part of the state's economy, and it's even more important to our agricultural economy. Cattle are raised in every county of Tennessee, mostly concentrated in Middle and East Tennessee, primarily owned and operated by local family farms. There are more than 79,000 farms in Tennessee, and 53% of those raise cattle. According to National Cattlemen's Beef Association, 97% of the nation's cattle farms are family-owned, and 42% of those farms have been in the same family for more than 50 years. Tennessee is actually one of the top beef-producing states in the nation, exceeding more than 2.3 million cattle statewide and valued at more than $1.62 billion. Since 1955, beef cow numbers have increased 360%, which can be attributed to a decline in dairy production, a reduction in acres devoted to row crop production, increase in pasture acreage, growth of local manufacturing, off-farm employment opportunities, as well as the number of farms passed to younger generations. Not only does the cattle industry greatly influence Tennessee's economics, but also contributes to our environmental well-being by maintaining green spaces, a feature greatly attractive to both Tennessee residents as well as our visitors. So a salute to our cattle producers in the state. Today, members, we have one bill before us. This is House Bill 1842 by Chairman Terry. We have a motion and a second. Chairman Terry, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chairman and Committee. Appreciate it. This bill simply requires that any Part 2 application for expansion or major modification of a Class 1 landfill include a letter of support from the local governments that are impacted, such as the county mayor or county commission, and a municipality within 1 mile. Currently, Part 2 of an application requires things like a hydrogeologic study and an engineering study. So in theory, it takes into account water and the environmental impact, but it doesn't take into account the quality of life impact expressed by the local elected officials. Landfills that fall under the Jackson Law by definition need to show good faith and partnership with the locals for any expansion. So the locals under those situations do have a seat at the table. Those that are outside the Jackson Law don't necessarily have that luxury. This bill would afford those citizens with equal protection and a seat at the table for any expansion. So when landfills are making a generational decision, those locals would have a say. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have one question. You mentioned the Jackson Law. Do you mind, for the committee's sake, just explaining that as best you can?
Yeah, I'd have to look for the copy of it here. But my understanding of the Jackson Law was passed in I think it came into effect June 2nd, 1989. And what it does is it requires the city or the county, those officials, to sign off on any new landfill or any expansion of landfills that were not permitted before 1989.
And for those that are prior to that date, how does that play out?
My understanding is that they aren't, if they don't fall under that, then they are grandfathered out of that requirement.
Okay. We do have some members with questions. Representative Reedy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Dr. Terry, I appreciate the earlier conversation and understanding that there are 17 landfills that fall outside of the Jackson Law. I believe there's going to be some unintended consequences. Has any conversation been had with the 16 other landfills about this bill, or what their thoughts are?
For me personally, I have not had conversations with them throughout the process, and over the years, I've talked with TDEC about the different landfills and gotten information from them on that. Over the years, I've tried to talk to legal about narrowing the scope of different types of legislation just to either apply to my county, and maybe legal can expound on that. But what I've always been informed, or my understanding was that if I'd narrowed it down, then it would be unconstitutional, so I have to apply it in a more statewide manner.
Representative Reedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because certainly in my district, I have a landfill, and of course, yes, it stinks, and yes, it's, I guess nobody that has a landfill is proud of it being in their district for the challenges we have, but certainly part of my district, my home county of Houston County, 8,000 people, we start having that discussion because by-county waste is where our waste goes to, and just the cost on the county, we start to paint a bigger picture that if any of these landfills decide to or get forced into closure, what do we do next? Nobody wants to take our trash, and that, it just becomes a huge issue. But I'll yield my time to other members, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Can I respond?
You're recognized.
And I do appreciate that. And, again, from a statewide perspective, I think all our citizens afford that equal protection and equal say at the table from that. And if you look back, 1989 was when that Jackson Law came into effect. And I don't know how long all those landfills are going to be, how long they're going to be open. That being said, last night, we heard the state of state, and I think the budget's going to be $52 billion proposed, and that's a significant jump in what we've had. And we have a significant surplus. We have a significant recurring surplus, and one of the things that the governor spoke about was infrastructure. And I do want to mention, like Rutherford County, fastest growing county. We're getting one new seat. Murfreesboro was named the #1 boom town. But last week, an article came out saying, America's dirtiest cities, and they talked about infrastructure. And Murfreesboro was worst infrastructure based off of one of the metrics was tonnage of waste it's in the county. So going back to 1989, when those do close, we have to do something. You are correct in that. And I would argue that with the funds that we have now, we're at the perfect time where that conversation needs to be had. We need to give our citizens the seat at the table, but we also need to be thinking, what else can we utilize that money for as far as infrastructure? Can we do a regional plan? Can we do a statewide plan? And have those discussions, but thank you.
Thank you, sir. Representative Cochran, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, first of all, Chairman Terry, I appreciate you bringing the legislation. This has, it's an issue in my district as well. We have a landfill that precedes the Jackson Law, and so I think there is a flaw currently in state law, the way that those who existed before 1989 are regulated. First of all, it makes complete sense to me that those landfills that existed before 1989, their original permitted footprint, we should not be able to retroactively regulate that footprint. That makes sense to me. I understand that. Once they leave that footprint, though, and expand beyond the footprint that existed before the Jackson Law, there absolutely should be local input on that expansion. That makes sense. That's why we put the Jackson Law in place. So if you have a new landfill, there will be local input. So just because you have two 50-acre fields that exist next to each other and one landfill existed before 1989, that they should be able to expand to that next 50-acre field. But if you had a brand new landfill come in at the 50-acre field, they would be regulated by the Jackson Law. It makes no sense. The spirit of the Jackson Law is that there is local input for landfill expansion. And so, I also understand that there are, like the landfill that you're discussing, it's a regional landfill. I think how many counties does it serve?
I think 34.
Yeah.
70% of it comes from outside Rutherford County.
Right, and I understand that, and like I said, I know that that's a need. We have to take our trash somewhere. Again, the landfill in my district, millions of pounds of garbage it accepts every week, and that's a necessary thing. Landfills are necessary. I don't think, however, that a community should be forced to take that garbage from now until eternity, just because that facility existed before the Jackson Law. They should not be forced to accept that from now on without some kind of local input. And so I think that's what this bill does. Some people would argue, well, that it would go before the regional solid waste board, an expansion would. I will tell you this, an expansion at Meadow Branch Landfill about 6 years ago did not go before the regional solid waste board. Feel free to look that up, anyone who would like to. I don't know if that was an error, but even if it goes to the regional solid waste board, let's think about what that is. That's the surrounding counties and your county represented there. If all the surrounding counties are sending their garbage to your county, they're going to approve an expansion of the landfill. That's like, 3 wolves and a sheep going to dinner, and they vote for what they're going to have. I can tell you who's going to win that vote. And so there should be input by the community that it's affecting. And so I'm in favor of that. I think there's probably a couple little sentences maybe in the legislation we could clean up a little bit, but I'm certainly in favor of the spirit of that. No community, again, just because a landfill existed before 1989, they should not have carte blanche expansion capabilities for that sole reason, just because they existed before a certain date. And so there should be that local input because there is very serious local impact. So anyway, I'm in favor of your legislation. I appreciate you bringing it. And again, I'm not for locals being able to arbitrarily deny expansion. But if there's good reason, if they can provide solid reason, there should always be that local input. You shouldn't be exempted from that. So I'm in favor of your bill. Thank you.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. And to your point about the local input, and to explain a little bit how not having that input could have an impact. Previously, I worked with legal and tried to get legislation that would allow the locals to have input on what other counties could actually send in, whether we could stop, wet sludge or whatever. And my understanding when I spoke with legal was that even if we were able to stop that from an interstate commerce clause, they could contract with people outside the state, and my locals wouldn't have any say in that. So to your point, I appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Representative Darby. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Terry, for bringing this. I can't imagine the phone calls that you get. And my phone calls that I get, and we're a rural area, we're definitely not the fastest growing county in the country. But with this, the citizens of Rutherford County, do they have to pay a trash pickup right now?
You're recognized, yes, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, there is a fee. I live in the city, and so we do have a fee for the city that we do have to pay, and I think they increased that not too long ago.
Chairman.
Representative Darby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If this was to pass and the excess cost, do the people there realize what the cost will be? Would I have to ship the trash somewhere else?
Thank you.
Yes, sir. You're recognized.
Great question. Both my county mayor and my city mayor support this, and they have said that, if our landfill, of course, the landfill that is in my district, they say is 6 to 8 years from closing. Of course, when I got elected, they said it was 6 to 8 years from closing. That was 8 years ago. But if it does close in that period of time, they're already planning, what they're going to do from a recycling center and different things like that. But they do support this. They have sent me, I've spoken to them. They have supported this, and so they do know that cost, and they're prepared for that.
Chairman Halford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what this is about is input from the local communities, government, and that kind of thing. Is that right?
You're recognized.
Thank you. Ultimately, yes, this is what would allow the locals that have been outside of the Jackson law would have input and have a seat at the table, yes.
And I agree with that. What assurance do we have that the two parties, if the accord was signed, what assurance do we have that they're not going to negotiate in good faith to reach a good, solid agreement, and that just won't be a vehicle for the county government or something like that to veto this by not signing on to the accord?
Representative Terry.
Thank you. I don't know that there's any guarantees. Again, they would be able at the table and be able to negotiate, and I don't know how those negotiations would enter. I mean, I don't know how they would end. I know that the county has put up RFPs on what they would like to do going forward, and so they may sit down with this landfill and maybe they could come up with a solution going forward. But I don't know that there's any guarantee.
Well, and then what I'm saying is, do we have assurance that they will meet and sit down and talk about it, regardless of what the final decision is? Do we have assurance that they will meet and negotiate?
Representative Terry.
Again, there's been an RFP process that they've gone under. I can't pull people. I don't control the local government, and I don't control the landfill operators on what they would do. But I would say that, as things get shorter and things get closer, pressure builds where people have to make decisions. And so I would say that at some point they would have to get in a room and figure this out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One observation from a couple of comments that have been made so far is the way the bill's written. It seems to require local support, a letter of local support from either the mayor or the local legislative body in order for that permit application to be complete. And if they don't get that, then it's kind of like a trump card. They literally, the application's incomplete, it can't move forward. So literally one signature could hold this up in a process that, has probably input levels from a lot of stakeholders through the permitting process. I don't know about the local boards and all that, but as Representative Cochran mentioned a while ago, that could be an issue when that board is made up of folks that don't have landfills and one entity that does. But to have it, I just want to make that observation that apparently the way this is written, it literally one signature from one person in that county or city could hold this whole process up. So that's just an observation, Representative Terry.
And to your point, the way that it's the current situation is the landfill owner puts out their proposal, and there's no input at all on that proposal, and so this would at least bring them to the table, allow them to come to the table to work on that proposal.
Representative Reedy.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Sitting on the Government Operations Committee as a sitting member, and maybe they already do it, could TDEC through rulemaking require public input? Tell us, what is the permitting process for expansion? And then it sounds like they get the permits, I would think, from TDEC, but then they don't allow for public input. I kind of find that a little ironic that they would not allow that to happen.
Representative Terry.
Thank you, and that is a great question. There is, through my understanding, through rulemaking regulations, that's what they've put on those applications. My understanding, there's a Part 1 application that ends up going to the regional board, and at that point, the board either gives a thumbs up or a thumbs down. At that point, either party can file a lawsuit. I think it goes to Chancery Court at that point in time. Eventually, once the decision is made from that Part 1 application, then it goes to the Part 2 application. Well, say if it gets voted down, TDEC, I think, can still overrule that. They can rule that it was arbitrary and capricious or whatever, overrule the lower board. But there's a Part 2 of it, and my understanding is that they have put in what needs to be on Part 2, which is the hydrogeologic survey, the engineering survey. And in my discussions with them, basically I was told that there's nothing that prohibits us as a General Assembly from adding something to that application, and that's where I got the idea for this legislation, is that I felt like what they had through their rulemaking process or to do that application was not complete. If you don't have the local input here, there is local input from the standpoint you can go in front of the board and you can talk to the board and you can have citizens come up there and talk, but the governing bodies can present to that board, but through that process and that application process, they don't have that authority. At least these 17 do not.
Representative Reedy?
So, in the permitting process, do local elected officials, city, county mayors, those folks, are they notified by TDEC that there's a pending permit for expansion?
Representative Terry?
Thank you. I think I was notified, I believe, by my county when they were notified. You know, it was dropped on them. They want to expand the landfill, and so there was not. From my understanding, there was no negotiation beforehand. They were just told, "Here it is," and then they called me, "Hey, we want to give you a heads up. This is what's going on."
Representative Reedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because I know right now all of our landfills have got issues, hauling off waste, especially waste tires. And I planned a meeting. It's be set up soon to talk to TDEC and others about the tire shredders. You know, there's a lot of stuff going to our landfills that don't need to be. If there's a way that we could figure out as a state, you know, actually helping private entities help recycle this and stop the waste that's going to all of our landfills. But I think that's part of the conversation I need to have with TDEC too, that it's if somebody's dropping the ball at their level, letting your local folks know what's going on, it's my understanding it's always they will reach out to the elected officials, you know, public officials, and then from there take it to folks that live in, you know, public opinion and take questions from the public on what's going on through all permitting processes. Working on different things in my district as far as sand and gravel companies starting up next to the Buffalo River, all of that. And there's, I'm constantly kept in the loop. So I would be curious to find out when a permit is discussed or pulled that the public should be or would be informed of in what's going on. But the challenge is, and in all of our districts, is trying to get information out to the voting public, especially on what's the politics, what's in the air, what's going on, that a lot of people just kind of turn us off until the nth hour, and at that, they do the rally cry and then try to shut down everything. And kind of to Chairman Halford's question that was asked, it would be, folks are going to be out there throwing in roadblocks for whatever reason for anything we do, you know, through the Forestry Service, through mining that we're trying to do in Tennessee, as well as what TDEC is trying to do. And so there's a lot of challenges. So I just kind of feel for myself there's some unintended consequences knowing that there's some pending lawsuits and so many things, so many moving parts. I'm going to have a hard time supporting this piece of legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Reedy. Representative Terry?
Thank you. And to your point, as far as getting information out, I will tell you that is getting it to the public is difficult. And I will say it was either my first or second session here. This particular landfill has a rock quarry in there, and they do blasting, and they needed to get a permit to crush the rock. And there was going to be a TDEC came down to have, I think there was a public hearing down there at one of the schools, and I went door to door knocking on hundreds of doors, passing out flyers to get people engaged and get them in there. Again, I appreciate, I mean, I'd like to have your support on this. I appreciate your comments. You know, this is a, you know, from an odor standpoint, you know, TDEC, you know, if I get complaints, then complaints will go to TDEC about this, and the issue that I get is they can regulate the processes, but they don't necessarily regulate the odors. And And so when I get the odor complaints, well, if the process is okay, well, then what was the problem? And for example, one of the issues that we have, and I'll tell you, I live a pretty good ways away from the landfill, but I have to drive by downtown Murfreesboro when I go to the hospital. And landfill closes, I think, at noon on Saturday. They cover it up, put dirt on it. Whatever's been put in there over the next few days percolates. Monday morning, when they're driving over it and they're cracking the posi shell and all that on there, you get an odor. And there's times when wind's blowing right, and I think it's about 8 miles away from the landfill. I'll smell it coming through there. I'll smell it going to the hospital, and it's a major impact that we have. And to do this another potential 30 years without having input or having a seat at the table of what we can be deposited out there, whether it's tires or anything like that, that's a major problem with this county and the city.
Thank you for that. I might mention, since the TDEC permitting process has been discussed quite a bit here, TDEC has always traditionally and by law provided the public with adequate notice, and that's changed over the years. You can now sign up for emails about any particular permitting process or topic with TDEC and get those on a regular basis. They wear my email out quite a bit with that because they're all across the state. So folks can be informed by that, and they still publish in the normal ways as well. But certainly, it's a point that should be asked and should be taken very seriously, that we make sure that the public is properly informed when decisions are being made. Representative Cochran, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I touched on this a little bit earlier, Chairman Terry. I'll try to phrase it in the form of a question this time, though. This landfill expansion, it's a new field, it's a new parcel of land that they're expanding on. Is that a parcel that currently doesn't have garbage would now contain garbage? Is that right?
Representative Terry.
Thank you. And to illustrate the point a little bit further, they have owned this land, but it is not the land that was under their original footprint.
Right.
In fact, the land has a park on it, and I will say, when I first moved to Rutherford County, they have a ball field, and our anesthesia group was participating in a softball tournament, and we practiced on that field. Mm-hmm. Those fields are going to go away. They would be incorporated into this landfill.
So there's a parcel of property next to your landfill that currently doesn't have garbage on it that now would. If a new landfill operation came in and bought that same parcel of property and said they were going to put garbage on it, they would have to go before local governing bodies to get some approval for that. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
And so that's my point. Why would this be any different? We have laws in place to ensure local input on landfill operations because they have impact on local populations. You shouldn't be able to bypass local input because of a nuance, because you existed before 1989. If that new landfill that bought that parcel would be required to get local input before they put garbage on that parcel of property, the existing landfill should have to get local input and some local approval before they put garbage on that new parcel of property. In my mind, there is no difference. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Terry, anything else?
Just thank you.
I have been told, and this may take us some research to clarify this, but as we've all dealt with legislation in this body, certain deals are made sometimes, assurances are made to get the votes. You explain things a certain way, there's a legislative intent given, and I have understood, I wasn't here to experience this, but I understand that when this bill was presented and passed, part of its passage and the votes were based on the understanding that these particular grandfathered, if you want to use that word, entities would never have this same level of approval put on them, that a local entity could not just single-handedly thwart an effort to expand. And I would love to have that clarified, quite frankly, to know if that in fact was the case, if there's a way to do that. Because if those assurances were made at that time to legislators to vote on this, then I think we need to understand that. We need to know that. I agree with Representative Cochran that, you know, a rule for one should be a rule for the other, but these were carved out. This rule was even put in place, I think, with the promise that these would not be included in that. So I think we need to recognize that at this point. But you know, before we make a decision. Any other questions? Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to ask the sponsor, would he give us maybe a week or so to look into that, to make sure that we make all the right decisions about this? I don't know.
Representative Terry, I am feeling that we need a little more information, and there may be a willingness on your part to maybe have this be looked at for a couple of weeks. I'd love to see this move to our February 15th calendar, if you would be so inclined.
I do have a little bit of wiggle room. I don't know that I have 2 weeks of wiggle room on this. I'd be, if the committee would pass it through, won't run it next week and hold it to the 15th before I did something in full committee. Or, you know, I could take this off notice for now, or whatever we need to do, and see about next week. I do understand your point about what the intent was then. I would make the argument that, you know, we as a General Assembly aren't tied to the General Assemblies that were the decisions they made years ago. We're a new General Assembly, so we have that authority. And circumstances change. I will say that, you know, when the landfill came into Rutherford County, those that voted on it, I think they thought the landfill was going to be 15 to 20 years. We're going on 30, and then a potential expansion may be another 30, and I don't think that was the intent of the original Jackson law, for them to do generational things without any sort of local input. But I'm at the will of the committee. You know, I would like to have y'all's support, and I don't want this to get a no vote because you don't have all your questions in front of you. So I'm at the will of whatever you guys would like. But this is kind of a time-sensitive matter, so I'm at the will of the committee.
I think from comments that have been made, I think maybe taking off notice might be the best way, and then you have control of when that conversation cranks back up. And I'd say even if it's just a week, then you know, we've got some things that can be done, conversation to be had. We can make sure stakeholders from other parts of the state that would be affected by this have some input as well, because I know that's a concern.
Okay, so from my perspective, if I do take this off notice and plan to put it back on, I need to know, I mean, the questions that you guys have specifically, and if you want stakeholders in a room, you know, if the committee can get that to me, I'd be more than happy to. But again, I don't want, for lack of information that you guys have and that you guys need, for this not to have a positive recommendation to the full committee.
Representative Reedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And trying to wrap my head around it in Representative Cochran's comments, and certainly that would be the question, is from previous legislation, if an expansion falls outside of the original intent of the bill that was in '89 that was passed, that yes, they would fall under already what would be the new law. But then my thoughts also as maybe an amended bill is just saying, try to catch it, not already in the works, but any of these 17 landfills, if they fall outside of their original footprint, the game changes.
It falls under the Jackson.
Yeah.
And to that point on the application, I will say that when that landfill did do an application, sorry.
Representative Terry,
they did specify that they felt like they fell outside of the Jackson law in their application. I will say that the city has disputed that, but I don't know if that has gone to court over
Yeah,
that.
we need to discuss that with legal, Mr. Chairman, and find out. But I think that's the right process is, in my opinion, is take the bill off notice and let's have some more conversation. And as you request, that if we need to get TDEC here to ask those questions, to let the public view it and to hear what's going on, especially for your district. And I understand it. It's, my landfill stinks too. And it's, I guess there's not a day that it doesn't, that I don't drive by it. But it's an ongoing challenge in the state of Tennessee, probably in every state in the union, is what do we, I don't want my trash, but your county doesn't want my trash either, really. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly. Any final?
I will take the recommendation of the committee and the chair again. This is, obviously, you guys know I'm passionate about this. And I, want you guys to be in the best position to support this as a positive recommendation to the full committee. So with that, if you guys want me to take this off notice to answer some more questions, and then I'll be happy to do that.
We certainly would entertain your direction. If you want to take it off notice, then we can do that here, and that gives you control. If we roll it a week, then it's going to be on next week's calendar.
And I have till, Wednesday, tomorrow at 3 to put it back on notice for next week. Is that correct?
Is that right? Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Let me, before I tie my hands on that, let me get the questions that you guys need and set up whatever meetings I need to make.
Okay.
And so I'll take it off notice.
Okay. So with that, House Bill 1842 is taken off notice. Any other business before the committee? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion and second. We are adjourned.